Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brody Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. If you've got a healthy curiosity, you want to know how you can be doing right by your body and how to live a more mindful, streamlined life in accordance with your values. While I love that you tune into the show every week, are you taking action? If not, why not? Here are the top 3 roadblocks that could be holding you back. 1, thinking that knowing is doing. They're different things. Knowing the properties of verbs is different than actually taking them. Knowing how to change a habit is different than actually changing up your routine. Knowing is the first step, but the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 100th steps involve action. Number 2, thinking that because you're smart and used to being successful, that you need to do it all yourself. This one dogged me for years as an independent-minded overachiever. That is, until I realized that 1, I can't see my own blind spots, and 2, I don't know what I don't know. Now, I'd much rather work with a guide who can point out the shortcut for the path I want to travel rather than get lost in the woods alone. Not only is it way easier, but I'm more likely to show up for myself if I've told my coach or my mastermind partners what I'm trying to do. Reason number 3, thinking that you don't have the money. What we spend money on is a reflection of what we're prioritizing. Maybe it's time to prioritize you. I'm opening up my calendar for a handful of one-on-one coaching clients. I've helped thousands of women break up with stress, optimize their habits, mood, hormones, weight, and vitality with integrative body-mind tools from Chinese medicine, yoga, neuroscience, coaching, and ancient wisdom. Just as importantly, I pour my heart into each of my clients, and you will feel that love in every single interaction. If you're ready to feel more calm and confident in your own skin, start feeling younger every year, feeling like you're at the center of your own life rather than just getting through it, and feel loved and supported in the process, head over to the Work With Me page at brodywelch.com and apply to work with me one-on-one. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. Now back to the show. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and with me today is Sukie Baxter, who is a posture and movement specialist and the author of Perfect Posture for Life and the mastermind behind the Whole Body Revolution, an informational resource for posture, pain relief, and healthy aging. Sukie helps people change their lives by changing the way they move. I am super excited to welcome Sukie to the show today because we met several years ago and have been sort of following each other online and sort of in tune with what each other is doing. And there's a lot of what she educates and helps people with that overlaps with the work that I do, but in a very different way. So we're going to be talking today about how we show up in the world and how we think about posture and how we should be thinking about posture and what that can mean as far as our health, our emotions, and our sense of ourselves. Sukie, welcome to today's show. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm so glad to be talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So before we just pressed record on this episode, you were saying that people seem to have a misconception about what posture even is. So let's start there. What do you mean by posture?
That's such a great place to start. So generally, when I'm talking to people about their posture, and I mentioned that I'm a posture and movement therapist, people will stand really tall and kind of arch their backs and pull their shoulders back and kind of, clench their abs and say like, oh, I really need to work on my posture. Almost like they're a little embarrassed, like, oh, this person, works with posture. I got to straighten up.
Well, like I'm imagining like some sort of outdated, super strict person with a ruler who's going to smack you if you're not, I mean, like it's the idea of like sit up straight or that these ideas of how we should be holding ourselves. And that's clearly not what your work focuses on. So yeah, what is it?
Yeah. So, the idea of posture as this rigid position in which you can hold your body it's unrealistic and it's unsustainable. And it's the reason that a lot of us think we need to work on our posture is because, we try to sit in this rigid pose. And after 30 seconds or so, your attention shifts and your body just kind of goes back to doing what it was doing because that's what bodies do.
Right. It's supposed to be operating in the background, right? Like our bodies, these things that we aren't supposed to have to pay attention to exist to serve the things that are more worthy of our attention. And so it's like, it is an unrealistic expectation on ourselves that we should be hyper aware of something that actually should be sort of background, right?
Absolutely. You don't have to mind your breathing. You don't have to I mean, we can control our breathing, but your heart rate is beneath your control, largely. So there's a lot going on. I mean, digestion, right? There's a lot of things in your body that happen without you having to consciously control them. And there are muscles that work without you having to think, okay, contract my glute 30%. And, your body does a lot of things on its own. And posture is one of those things. So the way that I like to work with bodies is not, in this sort of objectified way of like, okay, we're going to put you against a grid and line you up and that's what proper posture is, but really to treat the body as more of an information system that is constantly getting input from its environment around it. Some of that is, sensory input. And it's adapting to that on an ongoing basis. It's always shifting and changing and always moving.
Right, because life is dynamic, and if we're and our interaction with it is as well. So, if we have these ingrained ways that are these default patterns that we sink into that aren't necessarily well, like just what are the consequences of that? Like, why should we care?
Yeah, that's a great question. And oftentimes we don't care until we're in pain. Oftentimes people don't address movement dysfunction or restrictions in their body until something hurts and until it hurts pretty bad and they can't do the things they love to do. So that's one reason is you're in pain and you can't live your life comfortably. But another reason is that the way in which we move our bodies is the way that we move through life. So we store all of our life experience in our cells. Some people talk about that in the terms of like muscle memory. And I tend to think of it, just like a lived history. And so you learn to move in certain ways. We pattern ourselves based on the people around us, our caregivers, our community, our culture, what's acceptable. Women who grew up in a certain time period may not move their hips because it's too suggestive. They might pull their chest down because they feel like, oh, if my chest is up, that's just too exposed and too vulnerable. And it's, you get too much attention that way. And there's all kinds of shades and nuances and variances of these things that shape our posture and movement over time. And so they affect not only how you sit in front of a computer, not only the health of your joints and your muscles and your flexibility, but also how you think of yourself in relation to the world, how you relate to other people, because our bodies are the medium through which we experience life and connect to one another. And so when we start to explore our posture and movement patterns, we're actually exploring ourselves and we're exploring our beliefs about ourselves and how we should show up or how we do show up in the world.
So, how do we know that we might be in danger of developing pain or dysfunction from how we're holding ourselves in daily life?
You are probably in danger of developing dysfunction in your body if you have a very limited set of movements. So, if your movement repertoire is the same from day to day, you kind of do the same activities and you do them in the same way, and you don't challenge that in any regard, then you will likely have an ever limited repertoire because your body needs constant stimulation in order to know that it needs to keep certain movement patterns in certain ranges of motion. And so if your life is very much like you do the same exercise, you sit in front of the computer in the same kind of chair and you're just kind of going through everything the same way every day, eventually you're going to find that if you try to move in new ways, you can't. And you may find that you wind up with some pain if those patterns are dysfunctional. And it's hard to say whether they're dysfunctional, without looking at each individual person because everyone's movement is as unique as their signature.
And it only makes sense, though, that if a joint is capable of all kinds of ranges of motion, and if we have the capacity for sort of infinite physical expression, and we're only really sitting, standing, and walking, for example, like yeah, like we're going to our brains and our bodies are going to get kind of hardwired into like that's all we're really capable of. I mean, like, I think
Yeah.
the same thing with thought patterns, right? Like that as
Yeah.
we think the same things over and over again, that we really are limiting the possibilities of what could be true for us.
It's so true. And I really love movement because we tend to think about the body in this sort of top down, it's like mind body connection. We talk about the mind, we talk about the body, and we talk about, how like there's mind over matter and the placebo effect. And we know all of these things that the mind can do to the body, but it's a two-way street. So when you start to change your movement, you start to diversify that, you're diversifying your neural pathways, and neural pathways are part of your brain. So you're stimulating your brain in new ways. And it's like, I feel like the body is the bottom of the iceberg. You see that diagram with like the tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water, and everyone's talking about the mind and the thoughts and all of that. And I think that that is the tip of the iceberg. And there's all this biological stuff that we can't consciously comprehend happening beneath the surface. And through movement, we can sort of activate and influence those things. It's really incredible to see how people change emotionally when they let go of certain restrictions in their body. When I lived in Los Angeles, I studied with a woman named Emily Conrad, who started, she was an amazing movement pioneer. She's now since passed away. And she really focused on fluid movement and diversity of movement. And in her words, she said that repetitive movement patterns cause brain damage.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it, when you think about it? And there's another neuroscientist called Daniel Wolpert who he has a great TED Talk, and I'm trying to remember the exact name of it, but he talks about the reason why we have brains. And he says basically the only reason we have brains is to move. And organisms that do not move do not have brains. And he uses the sea squirt as an example because apparently sea squirts float around in their early life, and then they lodge on a rock. They're like, this is my home. I'm going to move in forever. They attach to the rock and then proceed to consume their own central nervous system, so
Oh,
their own
that's
brain.
wild. Well, and there's a couple of ways that we could be thinking about the brain body connection. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Even just like from my background in qigong and in yoga, the idea that the body mind is one thing. Like you can't actually separate the body mind, that separation is an ideological one or a philosophical one that's actually a false dichotomy, that the body is the mind and the mind is the body, and that we don't actually have access to all that we know if we are just kind of operating from the head up. And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever seen that? There's a really great show on Netflix called The OA. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh yeah, totally. Uh-huh.
So in the first season of the OA, there's like very early on, there's a quote, and I'll have to paraphrase it, but it was something like, "Knowledge is only a rumor until you have it in the body, or until the body knows it."
I like
Um,
it.
so yeah, and like I think I wrote it down somewhere because I was like, that is so true, right? Like it's so easy for us. A really good example is like, you watch a sport and you're like, oh, I could have done that so much better. Like you can see everything that someone is doing wrong. You can intellectually explain like the biomechanics of skiing or whatever thing, right? But to actually do it and to actually execute a turn on skis while going, I don't know, 90 miles an hour, it's a whole other thing. And it requires everything. It requires mental focus. It requires physical coordination. Like it is all of that at the same time. It's a whole other level of knowing something.
Yeah, in Chinese medicine, we make the distinction between qi and blood. Qi being energy and blood being kind of a more physical substance. Like yes, the red stuff that runs in our veins, but also kind of our identity or our sense of who we are in the world. And when we know something on the level of it's no longer separate from us. It's in your blood, right? It's like it's in your blood because you know it so well that it's been banked into your physicality.
Right, like written in your cells.
Yeah, exactly.
I
That
like it.
conception of it. The other thing that you just made me think of a minute ago with the brain is this idea of digital dementia, which I've been hearing about, right? That poor posture can actually cut off the supply of energy and blood going to the brain, and that people, even very young people, can be exhibiting symptoms of dementia that go away when they break up with their like hunched over looking at their cell phone shuffling posture.
I believe it. And for a couple of reasons. One is that we lack a lot of physical sensory stimulation from the digital world. So everything that we touch is very smooth textured. Like a phone screen is very smooth. Our nerves aren't getting the kind of richness that we get from the tangible world.
Texture
Um,
is really lacking.
Yeah, texture, exactly. And then the other piece of that is I've had conversations with a person who has autism and sensory processing disorder, and he is also a massage therapist and has said that he has observed more postural issues among people with sensory processing disorder, and that he believes there's a connection between, like, like fascial restrictions and I mean, he knows way more about sensory processing disorders than I do, but he talks about that there's a connection here between what's going on in the brain and how these people are functioning neurologically and what's happening in their bodies. So I think it's super interesting.
Absolutely. So what are some of the most common ways that you see people, or I guess like maybe a better question is the some of the most common homework assignments that you give people in terms of like how they can be, is obviously like there's our culture, we do a lot of sitting, we do a lot of what we do demands that we be kind of like curling forward, and or that there's an easy tendency for us to have this sort of like collapsed chest, forward head posture, those kinds of things that seems like there could be some pretty universal things that we can do to reverse that.
Yes, there are. And there are some basic principles of sitting that can really help everyone to sit better. So, the first one is to raise the height of your chair seat so that your hips are sitting higher than your knees. If your hips are lower than your knees, it's just very difficult to not rock back and sit on your tailbone. And if you're sitting on your tailbone, it's virtually impossible to sit up straight comfortably. So once you get your hips higher than your knees, then you can rock forward onto the sitting bones at the base of your pelvis, where you can then kind of stack your weight over a much more solid foundation. Sitting, in my opinion, should not be a strain. It shouldn't be hard. You shouldn't have to be tense. I abhor advice to clench your abs or brace your core. I don't think that's necessary. You'll see that almost universally in posture advice, where they'll say, when you're sitting up straight, clench your core. Don't do that. It impinges your breathing. It's terrible.
Yeah, it
But
seems like it exactly. I just did that as you were talking. I was like, nope, that's not going to work long term. And in fact, that's going to condition my breath to stay up in my chest, which is not going to help me relax.
we have a huge bias in this culture towards tension,
Yeah, we
right?
do.
And
Yang addiction.
yeah, and it comes back to this idea of, like, this brain is superior and it has to control this body that's like a wayward toddler that needs to be disciplined into, following orders. And why can't this body like get it together? And, if you set up the conditions properly for your body to sit well, then it's quite easy. There's a little bit of a re-education period for most people because particularly in Western cultures, particularly in the United States, we really like to sit on soft surfaces. And when you sit on something really soft, your body sinks in and it's pretty hard to have your weight stacked and supported and to sit up straight. So for a while, it feels a little awkward and strange. But once your body kind of gets this experience of upright and ease, it will go there naturally because your body is always trying to find efficiency. It's designed to be as efficient as possible. Making posture easy is sustainable. Making it hard is just not sustainable. You're not going to do it. It's going to fail every time.
This episode is brought to you by the Learn From Home department at brodywelch.com. The two things that I keep hearing over and over again from people in clinic that they want more than anything else is more energy and less stress. The number one thing people say they know they need to do but aren't doing is start a meditation practice. If this is you, you can do all of these things in just 20 minutes a day with my Learn From Anywhere Qigong class. Qigong, or energy exercise, is like a gentle exercise and moving meditation all in one. When I was first thinking about how I could help the most people improve their health and happiness in the shortest way possible for the lowest dollar value, the answer was crystal clear: teach people Qigong. In just 20 minutes a day, you can increase your energy and mobility while calming your nervous system and your mind. You can do it anywhere, anytime, with no special equipment and without getting sweaty. And when you change the way you breathe and move, you dramatically change how you feel. For just $97, you can download a simple practice that's like a multivitamin for each of your organ systems. In addition, I walk you through how to do each of the movements step by step. If you already have a meditation practice, check out my breathing bundle, a collection of practices designed to help you regulate your nervous system, whether you need calming, centering, or energizing. Explore 12 Treasures, the breathing bundle, and more at brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. Thanks for listening. Now back to the show. That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious if there is, in your research and in your work with people, what do you think of things like Amy Cuddy's power poses, right? Or this idea that we can, by making ourselves take up space and, stand in these powerful ways with our arms out and a wide stance and our hearts lifted towards the sky, that like, does that actually have a does that impact our thoughts and emotions?
Yes. So I love Amy Cuddy, actually. I love the idea of power posing because it actually corroborates a lot of and I'm not a yoga teacher, but as my understanding is that yoga poses that take up more space are usually indicated for like anxiety type conditions, which I've just learned through my own experience of going to yoga classes. In my professional experience, when people take up more space in their bodies, they do change. It's like stepping into themselves really fully. But I think that what Amy Cuddy has tapped into, she's kind of tapped into it on a macro level. And I think there's a much more subtle, nuanced level of that. So, for example, if someone has a rounded forward spine and their shoulders are tight across their chest and they bring their arms up into like that victory V, you'll see that they can't actually fully open their chest because their tissue is constricted in that way. So, yeah, they're putting their body into a more expansive place. But what I think is really beneficial is changing those neural set points in the muscles. And this is getting a little like body nerd, but
Oh, go for it. Yeah, I know. I love nerding out.
but I mean, the muscles aren't tight because they're too short. I think that's an assumption that a lot of people have is like, I just need to stretch more. I have these rubber bands inside my body that are just too short. I just need to elongate them. The reality is those muscles or those rubber bands are controlled by your brain. Your brain has decided for whatever reason, we don't know why, right? Could have been an accident, an injury, could be related to an overuse pattern or repetitive use pattern. It could be related to a trauma. It could be related to fear or anxiety. It can be related to so many different aspects. It can be related to multiples of those. But for whatever reason, your pec muscles on your chest are too short. Your brain has decided that the longest they can go is, whatever. And so it's great that you bring your arms up into that victory V, but what would be even more beneficial is if we could ease that tension, if we can sort of dissolve that set point and reset it so that your body can find a more neutral place where those shoulders can rest back, where your spine can elongate, where your chest can come up, which, by the way, is how you fix head forward posture, not by pulling your head back. It's by lifting that chest and getting rid of the hunched curve in the back. So I really like to play with relationships in the body, right? So how are the shoulders relating to the spine? How are the hips relating to the neck? All of that. We've kind of gotten off the topic of Amy Cuddy, but when people are going into these Wonder Woman poses, they're sort of like overlaying a pattern over top of the pattern they have. They're not really going into the pattern they have and dissolving those stuck points to kind of hit the reset button on their tension.
Yeah, it's really true. It's like they're adopting, they're practicing a new skill, adopting a new pose for a few moments or a few minutes, which can be great to change your mood. It's like everyone listening right now, if you want to have a better day, like stand up, put your arms over your head, lift your heart towards the sky, and take a breath. It's like I guarantee your mood is going to lift. It's there's certain things that that are just, it allows us to, that we can't possibly be breathing well, taking in fresh chi from the universe with a slumped forward, chest collapsed kind of posture. And like, so just if you want more access to joy, we've got to be breathing better.
Totally.
And that definitely, like, our posture can relate to how much breath we can take in, how much life we can take in. And that similarly, so yes to what you're saying, that like, there is, that we can be doing these things and being like, oh, well, that feels good. And it does shift my mood a bit to be doing this, right? That we shape shift to state shift, as we talk about in yoga, or in qigong. And absolutely, yes, to like, if you're feeling anxious, that it could be that what you need is to feel powerful. And so a warrior pose, warrior one, warrior two, a crescent lunge kind of a thing can help you feel strong, can help you feel capable. It could also be that what you need is to just feel supported by the earth in a child's pose, or, or put your entire belly on the earth, with your head on the top of your folded hands and just feeling yourself breathe, so that, not necessarily one size fits all on in my experience, as far as what helps, how we can use our bodies to talk to our minds, but but the fact that the fact that we can use our bodies to talk to our minds in various ways, is of course very real. And in Chinese medicine, we have, depending on kind of like our mental patterns, that we might be using particular meridians or particular channels to address those patterns. For example, liver meridian is supposed to be keeping us adaptable to stress, adaptable to the ever changing circumstances of life without us getting rigid and tight. And the liver channel comes right up and into the diaphragm. And so if our liver chi is stagnating, it's going to tighten down our diaphragm. It's going to not allow us to be breathing well. And that's going to have a feedback mechanism that operates with our nervous system that's going to keep us in a stressed out state. And
Absolutely.
so that idea of like, if that's the case, if you find yourself sighing a lot, if there's tension under the rib cage, that an acupuncturist, for example, might work to move the chi in the liver channel, which is very different than somebody who's feeling like sad and depressed and does have that kind of slumped shoulder, like protecting the heart. The grief tends to live in the lungs. So like we might in fact be doing like, depending on kind of like what emotional pattern someone's exhibiting, there's very likely also a physiological component. And an acupoint is just a place where the body's consciousness can be accessed. And, particularly it's like a little mini chakra. So that idea of
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
going in and speaking to it in that way. And what you were talking about earlier with the brain and its is it receptors that you were saying? Our sense of proprioception, right?
Right.
Our sense of where we are in space, our sense of how long a muscle can be, or like whether or not it's safe to move into a particular position. It involves a dialogue between the brain and the body. And so if
Mhm.
we want to strengthen that dialogue, can you give us some tips on that?
Yeah. So I think that awareness and somatic language are very important. We do not in our culture have a very good framework for self-awareness. We are so one of my biggest I don't know if a pet peeve is the right word for this, but it's like I find it kind of irritating, not on the individual level, but sort of on the bigger cultural level, is that often when I'm working with clients, somebody will ask me, is it responding? And I'm like, you mean your leg? You mean you? Like
Yeah.
this is you here. Like,
Why are you asking me? Is that the
yeah,
question?
like
Yeah.
what? I ask people, like, what are you feeling? Or I'll say, how are you doing here? And they'll say, fine, which is a great way to shut a conversation down, by the way.
Right.
It's like,
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
it's very
Fine.
dismissive. And so, to take a little side detour here, I a few years ago adopted a wild horse, which sounds totally unrelated, but believe me, trust me, it's related. So this wild horse, I mean, well, he had a little bit of handling when I got him, but basically I had to start from zero. Super nervous about everything, right? So working with them, obviously horses can't talk. So you're looking for signs of activation in their nervous system when you're working with these horses and getting them used to working with people. The wild horse I happened to get is I call him my HSP, my highly sensitive pony. He's
Oh.
like even more sensitive than most of the wild horses out there. So he has taught me to observe very minute changes in people, in nervous systems, in organisms, including, my cats and my clients and him. And what I see with him that I see also happening in our society is that if I put too much stress on him, he shuts down. So we've had this problem with him, and I've talked to different trainers, and I think I'm finally getting somewhere with him. I've talked to different trainers, and he stumped everyone where he would just kind of explode and he would bolt and he would run away. So people would always say, oh, this horse has a bolting problem. He would run away. It's dangerous. He's going to throw you off. This horse is crazy. Well, he wasn't crazy. It's just that there was so much stress, and he's an introvert and he's sensitive. And so he would just be like,
I'm
I'm
out of
fine.
here.
Well, at a certain point, right? But like it was a little stress. It was like being in an enclosed space is really stressful for him. So, okay, but I can handle this. She says it's okay. So I'm fine, right? Okay, I'm going to put a saddle pad on him. Okay, I'm fine. So he would say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And he was fine until he wasn't, and he completely exploded. And that's what I see with people is that we're so shut down to our own cues of stress and what's going on in our body. We don't have any dialogue for it. We don't have any framework for self-awareness. And we're conditioned by the ether, the culture that we grow up in, not to acknowledge the body. And we put a lot of attention on brain. There's a lot of focus on mental health. I think it's very interesting how easy it is to get a prescription for therapy, or at least in my experience, I know everybody's a little different, but I've noticed that prescriptions for therapy and anxiety medication and antidepressants are more accessible than like massage, right? So we tend to think like, oh, this is really important, is what I'm observing, is our culture says brains are really important. Bodies are not as important. As long as you can tolerate what's going on with you, it's fine. It's fine. You're fine. Just deal with it.
Right.
Right.
Or just that idea of that massage makes people feel good and invites a sense of relaxation and invites an awareness and a dialogue, but and it can also be very problem solving oriented depending on the style of body work that you're getting, but that is not as valued as physical therapy, for example. Like our system is focusing on solving a physical problem once it has reached a point of debilitation, as opposed to kind of correcting things before they become painful or limiting.
Yeah, and physical therapy is, I would say, as a whole. Although I know physical therapists who aren't this way, but just as a whole in how it fits into the medical industry, is very clinical and antiseptic, right? It's
Yeah.
like it focuses on the joint and the movement, and we analyze the planes of movement and the angles and the range. Like there's numbers and there's data and there's geometry, and it feels very like
Yes.
we are very practical and scientific. Whereas massage is like, how do you feel? And that's very subjective. And it shifts us more towards internal validation, which is, you kind of ask what people can start to do. And that's the shift that I want to see happening in everyone, is a shift towards internal validation versus external metrics.
Love
So
it.
we are all so focused right now on what our Fitbit is telling us to do. There's these, they drive me crazy. There's these posture devices that people put on, they're little like Fitbit type things, wearable tech that you put on your back, and they like buzz when you slouch. And I'm like, how does it really? I mean, that's that's one data point. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't take into account the relationships of your body or the activity. What if you're bending over to pick up your 3-year-old? Like there's all these external measures of how our bodies should be in the world, and nobody says, but how are you feeling right now? And we don't have a good framework for that. And so if I could make one shift for people, it would be to start to develop that awareness of what sensations do you actually have in your body at this moment. Like if you're feeling fear, what is the physical sensation of fear? Like where do you feel that? Is it tension? Is it jumpiness? Is it, what are your muscles doing? Do you feel your breath get smaller? Start to pay attention to those sensations. And that, I mean, it's world changing when you start to have that awareness.
I'd like you to fill that out for us. So we start to tune in to what we're noticing. Okay, I'm sensing the tightness in my chest. I'm sensing the shallow breathing. I'm sensing some tension in my gut. I'm sensing that my jaw is tighter than it needs to be, and that like there's a sensation at the base of my skull, all of which go along with this sensation of tension slash fear slash readiness to handle it. What's the next step?
So there's a lot of different places you can go with that. You can simply stay with that sensation and keep your awareness on it for a while and see what happens in your body. You might notice things coming up. You might notice other sensations. You might notice that your body wants to move in a certain way, or you may be like, "This is really uncomfortable, and I don't want to sit with this." And in that instance, I would say it's really great to shift your awareness to what feels good, which is another thing that we're even less good at, is paying attention to what's feeling really great. And in instances where people come in who, the majority of my clients are at the point where they're in pain. Because, like I said at the beginning, that's where people take action, is like when they can no longer function in a reasonable manner in their life. And, and not everyone, I would say, but the bulk of people. And so at that point, they have been so conditioned to focus on pain and describe pain that sometimes there's more power in following what feels good. So if you start to notice unpleasant sensations in your body and it makes you feel kind of meh and icky and you don't like it, find the places that feel good. It can be as simple as noticing the pressure of your feet on the floor, or even the texture of the ground under your feet, the weight of your pelvis in a chair. You can just start to put your attention, and this is very much what meditation does, you can start to put your attention on your breath and start to notice where, not just that you're breathing, but where are you breathing? Where in your body is that? And even if it's not what you think it should be, we're so good at judging, right? I should be breathing here, I should be breathing there. This is good breathing, that's bad breathing. Let all of that go and just kind of notice what is and what parts of that feel really good. And as you start to notice the parts that feel really good, you can kind of try to expand them. Like if you have a little bit of breath in your chest and it feels relaxed and soft and light, and you enjoy that sensation, can you make it bigger?
I love both of those points that you made. Is like it sounds like you were saying like, yeah, you can hang out with the unpleasantness and see if it shifts. You can also take your attention to or get curious about it, but you can also amplify the good stuff, because so often pain is a messenger that gets a signal from the body of like, pay attention here. And we can be so hyper alert for those messages, especially if we have been in pain for a long time, that yeah, like we forget that the body is also this tremendous source of pleasure, and that there's things that can feel wonderful, that are really simple. And this is a place where I really love qigong, where like these relatively simple, usually flowy movements that are often sort of repetitive, that you can just kind of sink into how good it feels and just kind of trance out on it for a little while. And that a question that to me helps open me up to what could feel good right now is like, what would this part of the body feel like if it could breathe? Like
Oh,
how would it move if it could breathe?
I love that. And it's interesting that you say that, because breath is an assessment tool that I use every day with my clients. I ask them to breathe and I look for what part of your body isn't responding. It's kind of like
Mhm.
I liken it to watching a river, and where are the rocks in the stream that are breaking up the flow of the river? And those rocks are the places that your body has lost resilience. And so, we talked about how posture isn't necessarily what people think it is.
Right.
I look at posture as resilient, because your body has to be adaptable to each new activity. I don't think it's the shape that's the problem. So, posture is really just the shape that you're holding your body in. And it's not that any one shape is better or worse than another shape. It's being stuck in that shape that's the problem.
Ooh, that we need to be shapeshifters.
Exactly. And so you can use breath as a tool to look like what parts of the body are responsive, what parts are
Mhm.
kind of coming to the party and like they're
Yeah.
relating, and what parts are sort of cut off. And it's interesting what you start to see, because when you really start to look for that movement of breath, you see that every inhale, the whole body opens and responds, and every exhale, the whole body kind of, exhale is participating in that, or ideally, right? That would be a very resilient place to be.
It sounds beautiful, and also just that notion of like getting back to the notion that we are not these separate parts. Like we're an organic whole, and it's just the idea that we can subdivide into various different kinds of muscles and ligaments, and these pieces of things, when really it's like it all is one living river of energy. Like that really, that we're mostly empty space with some matter, and that if we see ourselves as this big potential, like sort of, if we see ourselves as a field that has some stuff that needs to organize into movement, that a lot more becomes possible in terms of it, like, and especially if we believe that it is for ourselves, like if we see ourselves doing a particular movement or capable of something, we can usually stretch into it, I believe, a pretty significant percentage.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. I completely agree with that. I think that it's not mind over matter, but mind with matter.
Hmm.
It's that connection between like our attention and our presence in our physical selves is where that happens. That, that beautiful like growing into movements. I think it's totally possible.
And it's really it seems like if we have the capacity to put our awareness in a particular part of our bodies, it's like we're creating that dialogue. We're getting more familiar with what that piece is capable of and what it feels like in space. And that it seems like the more familiar we are with that, the more we have the capacity to invite in relaxation, to invite in some softening, or to be able to listen to what it needs in order to allow us to maybe regain some of that resilience.
Absolutely. And I love that you use the word dialogue, because I do think that that is the piece that is missing. Everything in our conventional medical system has been sort of demanding of the body, like, you do this. And it doesn't ask many questions. It doesn't say, how does this movement feel? Does it feel, other than pain, right? A lot of times we're asked to
Yeah.
rate pain, but none of this, like, does this feel nourishing? Does this feel pleasant? Does this feel, there's a lot more to sensation than either pain or like nothing, like absence of pain. There's so much more that's available in there. And when you start to open that up, I mean, that's where the changes really start to happen. And that's where we're really accessing, those neural patterns that I was talking about with, the stored patterns and those set points that our brain has decided on. It's by creating that dialogue that you create that softening in the nervous system.
And then a lot more becomes possible, right? Like that I know that in my own life experience, that if I can see it in my mind's eye what I want my body to do, and that it's like, and if I take away the concept of that I can't do it, a lot of times it's like it's there.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to take away that controlling aspect, that
Sure.
forcing aspect.
Pushing, yes.
Yeah, yeah, because I see a lot of times, people want to get really aggressive with things. And, if you think about your body doesn't even know that language exists. There's a lot of your body that, like, language isn't even a thing. You can't talk logic to it because it's existing in a different time and space. Biology is ancient. So you have to talk its language, and its language is sensation. And when you can get into that sensation, you create that safety so that your body can let down its guard. And that's where that possibility comes in, right? Because the guard has been lowered. It's no longer defending. It's no longer armoring itself against, like, some threat that it believes exists.
Absolutely. Well, it seems too like that. I mean, if everything, when we are in a state of stress, we're in a state of tension, and we exhibit that tension in our physical bodies as well as in our in our minds. And that when we're in a state of relaxation, there's a softening and an opening and an allowing that that being in that state, cultivating, it seems like, a sense of ease in our bodies facilitates that dialogue, and it facilitates just that even just being in that relaxed state, it's a positive feedback loop. Because when we touch ourselves, like, if we give ourselves comforting touch, we're stimulating oxytocin, bonding hormone, love hormone, that's going to take down cortisol, or stress response. It's going to enable us to feel more comfortable, literally.
Yeah, well, I mean, tension is a function of the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, right? It
Yes.
goes with that. So when tension goes away, sympathetic activation decreases. So we come out of that fight or flight, and we go into our parasympathetic, which is rest and relax. And so it's so much. I mean, if your body believes that a tiger has you know, a hold on your calf, it's not going to be like, let's increase our flexibility. It's just not. It doesn't make sense, right? So as that sympathetic, that fight or flight comes down, you have more available because your body's like, oh, no tiger, we're good, we're safe. Like, your creativity goes up, anxiety decreases. It's really interesting to see all of the effects. There's quite a lot of studies on posture, which I think are just the tip of the iceberg.
Hmm.
But they talk about how, like, relaxed postures, upright postures, they have you recall more happy memories. People feel more upbeat, less depressed. They have better problem solving abilities, better focus. I mean, there's all these great cognitive benefits, right? More creativity. I don't know of any studies on this, but I would put money on better interpersonal relationships, because you can't relate to someone when you're in fight or flight because
Yeah.
you're just in reactivity mode. So that's that's where the bad stuff happens. That's where the fights happen and the misunderstandings and the jumping down someone's throat because you're just so stressed all the time. So when you change the state of someone's body, you change the state of their mind. And like, I think the benefits are incredible.
Yeah, I see that all the time with acupuncture for depression and anxiety. That just like I can put a needle at gallbladder 21, which is at the top of the shoulder, and just letting go of that tight shoulder, the person remembers what it's like to feel relaxed.
Yeah,
And so like even apart from whatever neurotransmitters are talking to the brain to make them feel relaxed, it's like that just having that sense of it, of what it's like to embody relaxation, it can catalyze profound shifts for people.
absolutely.
I'd love to know about in your life, what are your practices that help you have resilient posture?
So that's a great question. I am fairly active on a daily basis. I don't have a sedentary life because I'm, mostly up and working with clients. So I really benefit from that. The days when I do more computer work, I do notice that. So I think that being up and moving around is a huge piece for me. I do my own movement practices. It's not yoga. It's not anything that would be formalized in that regard, but they're practices that I actually have a lot of them are on video, and I've put them in my posture rehab program, which I have on my website. And these are just practices in movement and self awareness. And, when I start to feel like I'm not moving well, I kind of go into my body and I follow the sensations of like what feels stuck and what feels like it's not allowing me to really stand up straight and what's feeling crunched. And I use movement to unwind my body. And I think those two things combined keep me feeling really well. I do get body work sometimes, but I don't. It's not like I get body work every week, like you might think a body worker does. I get it, on an as needed basis. It's pretty much the movement.
I love that you said that because that's a lot of, I mean, after all of all of the formal training that I've had in so many different forms of qigong and so many years of yoga practice, that my practice is kind of my movement practice, which is like what I go to in terms of like helping my body feel better, is a big hybrid that doesn't look like anything in particular. It would look very, well, it looks different, but there certain things that I fall back on are certainly not like within a particular tradition. It's just unique to like where my injuries are, where my chi is stuck, or what I want to experience more of. And it's a kind of like, it's not the kind of thing I even would do in public necessarily. It's because it feels like a deeply personal thing. But I love that you have a similar idea of like that first of all, that you've created a system, it sounds like, based on it, and it seems like you're giving people a framework for exploring themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where, self awareness is a really big part of my posture rehab system that I have online because while it gives specific practices and it outlines, specific practices and here's how you go through the practice and here's how you do it. My main goal with each movement practice is to help people to feel their bodies because what I found is that, my clients who get there, who get to the point where they can really feel their own bodies, they almost always report back to me, I was laying in bed and I just started to feel this thing and I started moving in this way. And I just, I found myself kind of wiggling this way and wiggling that way. And it's like you said, the movement practice becomes deeply personal and it becomes this thing that is so nourishing. And it's this dialogue with your own body that you kind of own to yourself. And it really, it's that shift towards that internal validation, that being sort of, internally guided towards your movement practice rather than like, well, the textbook says to stretch like this and hold my arm like that and stay here for 30 seconds. It's like, wow, it would really feel amazing if I just gave this stretch a little twist. And then, oh, wow, now that opens up a whole other thing. And it's like a whole part of my spine that I've never felt before. And that it's where the magic happens, really.
That sounds so like a process of discovery and curiosity, which is just a really beautiful place to be with getting to know ourselves.
Absolutely. Yes.
So if people want to discover this for themselves and learn more about your work, where would they go?
I am at wholebodyrevolution.com. You
Great.
can,
I'll make sure that that is in the show notes.
yeah, absolutely.
Sukie Baxter, this has been such a fun and informative conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great, and I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodywelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.